Darkness settled over the Russian frontier like a warning. Somewhere beyond the frozen roads of Kursk, a force that was never supposed to be there began moving quietly into position. They had crossed thousands of miles from North Korea, not as tourists, not as observers, but as soldiers in a war that was already devouring men faster than Moscow could replace them. For Vladimir Putin, they were meant to be reinforcements. For Kim Jong-un, they may have been something else entirely. The journey had begun far from the battlefield, in a country where soldiers march perfectly in parades but rarely face the chaos of modern war. Trains, trucks, and military convoys carried them across Russia, deeper and deeper into a conflict they barely understood. By the time they reached Kursk, many of them were exhausted, underfed, and surrounded by commanders, speaking a language they did not know. They were placed near Russian units already battered by months of fighting, checkpoints, trenches, observation posts, rear area security. On paper, it looked organized. In reality, it was fragile from the start. The North Korean troops had arrived in a war ruled by drones, artillery, thermal cameras, electronic warfare, and long-range missiles. But many of them had been trained for a different world, a world of slogans, formations, and obedience. Russia needed bodies. That was the brutal truth. After years of war in Ukraine, Moscow was bleeding manpower. Every trench demanded more men, every failed assault demanded replacements, and every new mobilization carried political risk at home. So the alliance with North Korea offered Putin a temporary solution: soldiers without the burden of calling up too many Russians. But the first cracks appeared almost immediately. Russian commanders expected discipline. They expected endurance. They expected troops who could be folded into the machine and pushed toward the front. Instead, reports suggested confusion, frustration, and disbelief. The North Korean soldiers were unfamiliar with Russian battlefield procedures. They struggled with language. They struggled with equipment. Some seemed overwhelmed by basic exposure to the outside world. And then came the question no Russian commander wanted to ask out loud. What exactly were they supposed to do with them? The first shock was not a major battle. It was the realization that this alliance had brought Russia more problems than strength. Orders had to be simplified. Translators became necessary. Even basic coordination became dangerous. In combat, a misunderstood command can kill an entire squad. A delay of seconds can turn an advance into a massacre. The battlefield does not forgive confusion. If you're following this unfolding situation, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next completely changes the direction of this war. Then the war began to close in. Ukraine had already shown that Kursk was no longer a distant rear area. Russian soil itself had become part of the battlefield. The arrival of North Korean troops changed the political calculation even further. What was meant to help Russia stabilize the front instead helped justify deeper strikes against targets inside Russian territory. Long-range weapons entered the picture. ATACMS, Storm Shadow, Scalp. Names that once belonged to military briefings now carried a darker meaning for the men deployed in Kursk. These missiles could reach far beyond the immediate front. They could strike command posts, ammunition depots, troop concentrations, and logistical nodes. For Putin, the consequences were bitter. The foreign troops he brought in to strengthen Russia had helped widen the war onto Russian ground. And for the North Koreans, there was no time to adapt. The first engagements were limited, but limited does not mean safe. In the fog of probing attacks and contested positions, North Korean soldiers reportedly found themselves facing Ukrainian forces hardened by years of modern combat. Ukrainian units had learned to fight under drones, survive artillery storms, and strike with precision. The newcomers had not. The contrast was severe. One side had been shaped by a brutal 21st century war. The other had been shaped by isolation. When the shooting started, parade discipline meant very little. The battlefield was loud, fast, and merciless. Explosions shattered the night. Drones watched from above. Artillery corrected within minutes. A movement spotted in the open could become a death sentence before a soldier even understood he had been seen. For Russia, the attack was supposed to demonstrate pressure. It was supposed to show that Moscow still had manpower, still had allies, still had momentum. But the result was far more complicated. The North Korean troops did not transform the battlefield. They exposed the desperation behind it. Still, for a short moment, Moscow could pretend. State messaging could present the alliance as proof that Russia was not isolated. Public ceremonies could frame the partnership as strategic, historic, and defiant. Kim Jong-un could promise unwavering support. Putin could stand beside another leader and project strength. Cameras could capture handshakes. Speeches could speak of sovereignty, resistance, and a new world order. But away from the microphones, the picture looked different. The soldiers in Kursk needed food. They needed coordination. They needed training. They needed time Russia did not have. Some reports suggested tensions grew over poor supplies. North Korean troops, promised better conditions, found that Russia's war machine could barely feed its own men properly, let alone thousands more from abroad. Emergency redistribution of rations reportedly became necessary. That detail alone revealed the weakness behind the display of unity. Because hunger is not just discomfort in war. Hunger breaks morale. It slows reflexes. It weakens judgment. It turns discipline into resentment. And among troops already unfamiliar with their surroundings, it can become something far more dangerous. The temporary confidence began to fade. Russia had gained numbers, but not necessarily combat power. It had gained another flag on its side, but not a reliable force. The alliance looked strong from a podium, but in the field, every weakness became visible. The language barrier, the lack of modern combat experience, the poor physical condition of some troops, the cultural shock, the dependency on Russian logistics, and then the battlefield shifted again. Once Ukrainian strikes began targeting the Kursk region with greater reach, the sense of control disappeared. Rear areas were no longer safe. Staging zones could be watched. Supply lines could be hit. Troops waiting behind the front could suddenly find themselves under fire. The war was no longer something the North Koreans could observe from a distance. It was coming for them. Then came the retreating instinct. Not always a full retreat, sometimes just repositioning, sometimes moving from one trench line to another, sometimes pulling men away from exposed ground before drones found them. But every movement carried risk. Roads could be targeted, tree lines could be watched, radio traffic could be intercepted. A unit trying to escape fire could run straight into another strike. This is where inexperience becomes deadly. Veteran soldiers know how to move under observation. They understand spacing. They understand when to freeze, when to run, when to abandon equipment, and when to keep silent. Soldiers without that experience often move in groups, hesitate in the open, or follow orders too slowly because they do not understand the danger until it arrives. For the North Koreans, the war became a chase. Not a cinematic chase with clear enemies and clean lines, but a hunt conducted by sensors, drones, artillery, and intelligence. The sky itself became hostile. Every buzzing sound above the trees could mean a drone. Every pause in shelling could mean correction. Every abandoned road could be waiting for the next blast. The soldiers had come from one of the most controlled societies on Earth. Now they stood inside one of the least controlled environments imaginable, and the losses began to matter. Before we go further, tell me what you think. Was this alliance ever meant to succeed, or was it doomed from the start? Reports of North Korean casualties carried a weight beyond numbers. These were not just reinforcements on a spreadsheet. They were men sent far from home into a war their own people might never fully understand. Some had likely been told they were serving a great cause. Some may have believed they were proving loyalty. Others may have had no choice at all. On the Russian side, their deaths could be absorbed into the wider machinery of war. On the North Korean side, their deaths could be hidden, denied, or reframed. But on the ground, none of that changed the reality. A soldier who cannot understand the command shouted beside him is still vulnerable. A soldier who has never fought under drones is still exposed. A soldier sent into a foreign war for another leader's survival is still paying the price. That is the human cost behind the alliance, and it raises an uncomfortable question. Who was really using whom? Putin needed manpower. Kim needed money, leverage, and technology. Russia reportedly offered financial compensation and military cooperation. North Korea gained attention, relevance, and possibly access to equipment or support that could strengthen its own military ambitions. On paper, both sides benefited, but the soldiers did not. They became the currency of the deal. For Kim, sending men abroad could remove unwanted burdens while bringing in foreign cash and strategic favors. For Putin, using foreign troops could reduce pressure on Russian mobilization while keeping the war effort alive. Each leader could claim resolve, Each could claim partnership. Each could pretend the arrangement was a sign of strength. But strength built on desperate manpower is not strength. It is delay. The North Korean deployment did not solve Russia's core problem. It revealed it. A great power does not import underprepared soldiers from an isolated state unless it is under enormous strain. A confident army does not rely on troops who cannot easily communicate with its commanders. A stable war effort does not need to dress desperation as strategy. Yet the war continued. In the cold, the mud, and the shattered villages around Kursk, the alliance became real not through speeches, but through casualties. The men who survived had to learn quickly or disappear into the machinery of the front. Those who failed became part of a growing toll that both governments had reasons to minimize. And still, the propaganda kept moving. Publicly, Russia could say it had friends. North Korea could say it stood beside a powerful ally. Together, they could speak of resistance against the West, of sovereignty, of a new global balance. But behind every grand phrase was a simpler truth. Both regimes were protecting their image, and soldiers were being spent to maintain it. That is where the story becomes larger than Kursk. This was not just a strange footnote in the Ukraine war. It was a glimpse into a harsher geopolitical reality. Russia, weakened by a long war, had turned to North Korea. North Korea, isolated but opportunistic, had turned that weakness into leverage. And Ukraine, facing a broader coalition of hostile support, gained new justification to strike deeper and harder. The alliance changed the battlefield, but not in the way Putin hoped. Instead of delivering a decisive advantage, it brought embarrassment, risk, and escalation. Instead of showing Russian strength, it showed dependency. Instead of giving Kim a subordinate role, it gave him bargaining power. In the end, the most dangerous part of this story is not that North Korean soldiers arrived in Russia. It is what their arrival revealed. It revealed that the war had grown beyond Ukraine's borders in every meaningful sense. It revealed that authoritarian alliances can be built not on trust, but on need. It revealed that soldiers can be moved like pieces on a board by leaders who will never stand in the trenches themselves. And it revealed something even colder. For Putin, these troops may be expendable. For Kim, they may be useful. But for the men sent into Kursk, the alliance was not strategy. It was hunger, confusion, fear, and fire. The world saw a partnership signed in ink. The battlefield saw what it was really written in. And if you want more real stories like this, raw, unfiltered, and closer to the truth than ever, stay with us.